Welcome to the Phenomenal Podcast, an authentic forum where real conversations happen. I'm your host, Phen, and each episode features an unscripted chat with everyday people. Get ready for a genuine, raw discussion. Enjoy the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 20 of the Phenomenal Podcast. I have Polina with me today, Polina Pompliano. You still use your maiden name?
Sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, it's on your book cover. So Polina is a published author, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Let you just tell us a little bit about yourself. So.
Oh God. So I have been in journalism my whole life since high school. I was editor of my college paper, went on to work at CNN, USA Today, then Fortune magazine. I was at Fortune covering tech and venture capital until 2020. And then I left to build my own media business called The Profile, which has a newsletter, which is how you and I met. And I wrote a book 2 years ago. Is it 2 years ago? I think 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Called
I think it came out last summer.
Yes. Actually, Yeah. I started writing it 2 years ago, but it came out last year. Yeah.
Hidden Genius. That's and I have it. It's right here. I read it for the second time, and I finished it on Saturday. I wanted to be prepared.
Thank you.
The first time it took me over a year to finish, and that's not because of you. I'm just a bad reader, and I'm trying to get better at it. This time I finished in a month. So
yeah, don't worry. It took me a year to write, so all good.
Yeah, but writing a book in a year is very impressive.
Actually, I actually wrote it in a few months, but that's because the bulk of it was written through my newsletter. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. A lot of the foundation's already there, so I kind of just added on.
Right. All right. Super cool. And we want to talk about your book, of course, but I had a general flow. I just want to get to know you and let people get to know you. I listened to a few podcasts with Grant, or no, sorry. Who was it? Not Grant. I just listened to one yesterday, the Irish guy. I forgot his name.
Oh, yeah. Darren?
Yeah. Darren. I don't know why I said Grant. That's not even close. But I listened to it yesterday, and he was asking you about your book and everything, and I'm sure you get a lot of those questions, but kind of want to pivot and do something.
Yeah, let's make this different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
So I know some about you because of what you've written in the book. I know that you immigrated to the U.S. when you were young from Bulgaria, right? Okay. Yeah. How old were you when that happened?
I was 8.
8. Okay. Very cool. And did you move to Georgia originally?
Yeah.
We grew up, I think you're a little older than I am, but we grew up pretty close to each other.
Yeah. Remind me where you grew up.
I grew up in Marietta, specifically like East Cobb. I went to Walton High School, if you know. Yeah.
Of course I know Walton. They had all the best sports programs.
Yeah, I was not on any of those. I wasn't good enough. But
don't worry, I was on the losing end of the soccer team.
Oh, well, that's cool. I didn't know you played soccer. So
yeah.
What was that? What was the transition like from Bulgaria to the US?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I was born in Bulgaria. I was there until I was 8. So I spent first and part of second grade there. And it was interesting because we had never traveled outside of the country. So I was like, to me, the United States was this like conceptual, like theoretical thing.
Right.
My dad was he was part of the anti-communism movement, which was very radical in Bulgaria because Bulgaria was like a socialist country until 89. And his dream was to go to the United States and all this stuff. So the US had a green card lottery program where you could apply every year for a green card lottery. It was something instituted by one of the administrations just to, promote legal immigration. But if it's not merit-based, because a lot of the merit-based ones at the time would end up in the hands of like the diplomats or the corrupt government officials and their kids. So yeah, merit-based, but if you were in this part of the country, you could apply. So this was totally random. It was just a lottery. And my dad ended up being one of the people who won, quote unquote. But then when you win, it's not an automatic guarantee that you come here. You have to go through this whole interview process with the US Embassy, background checks, all sorts of checks. It takes about a year.
Yeah.
And then finally, you have to prove that you know somebody here, that you'll be able to work. They'll help you find a job. They'll help you find a place to live. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. Wow.
We somehow got through all of that, even
Uh,
though we didn't know anybody here. I think like my grandfather's cousin, we found someone who would vouch for us. So then finally, you have to go where you know the person. The
Yeah.
person we knew was in Atlanta, Georgia. So
Okay.
that is how I ended up there. Totally random,
Well, yeah.
not because of anything else. And so when I got here, I was like, well, this is just completely different
Yeah.
because many people from other countries will know when you think about the US, you often think about New York or LA. Like
Right.
that's the movies, that's what you see palm trees or you see skyscrapers.
Right.
You do not think like Georgia.
Right. Yeah.
So when I got here, I was like, well, this is kind of interesting. You have to drive everywhere. You can't walk. Like Bulgaria was super urban.
Mhm.
You walk to coffee shops. Like it was very walkable.
Mhm.
And then suddenly I'm 8. I'm in school where you have to get on the bus to go there. You get back on the bus to go home. There's no freedom in
Yeah.
Bulgaria. Like even in first grade, we were allowed to leave for lunch. Like they
Oh.
trusted us enough to be like, okay, you can leave school, go get
Yeah.
lunch and come back, because you know that if you don't come back, they'll call your parents. Terrifying. So when I was
Right.
when I was here, I was like, not only can I not leave the school, I cannot leave the classroom, and everything's super structured. So I think for me in the beginning, not only was it a culture shock, I didn't know that language, I didn't have friends, I didn't know cultural norms,
Right.
but I also kind of felt like I lost a lot of freedom, and I felt very much like, oh, you are a child and you are not trusted.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of my peers in Bulgaria were way more independent, way faster than I got to be.
That is so interesting, and something that I connected between the first part of your story, your dad saying he was so anti-communism, and then you came here and you felt like you had less freedoms.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's a cool thing to hear about your dad, because doing radical things and doing hard things, especially in areas like that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Did you?
It's
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna like, how did that affect you growing up? Like, did you look at that when you were younger, or do you look at it more now? Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think I've ever talked about this, but on my dad's side of the family,
mhm,
there were, so it all started with my grandfather and like his siblings and his cousins,
mhm,
because a lot of them either got killed or put
mm,
in like concentration camps or prison,
yeah,
simply because of what they believed in, which was they didn't believe in communism. And it's so difficult to think about, like, oh my God, based on your like thinking,
yeah,
you can get imprisoned.
yeah,
And they were principled enough to be like, I don't care if you kill me, put me in prison, send me into a labor camp. I'm still going to believe these things. And I think it's made me a much more principled thinker. And
mm,
also, like, I'm not afraid to stand up for the right thing.
yeah,
I think there's a lot of conversation now in the United States about like, oh, freedom of speech, like, oh, whatever. And it's like, you do not realize that it's such an important thing,
yeah,
because until you lose it, it's huge. And that's part of the reason that I was so passionate about journalism and all that stuff, is because I've seen
yeah,
what it is to not have a free press and to not be able to say what you think.
mm,
But I actually have talked to my dad about a lot of that stuff. Like, I was a kid and he was going out in the streets, like protesting, getting like tear gassed by the police. And I was like, was it worth it? And he's like, at the time I thought so.
mhm,
But what I didn't realize is, like, we thought that this new government that we were hoping would come in would bring democracy, because we thought that democracy was like what we had in America, or what people had in America. But then what you don't realize is, because they had never lived in it,
mhm,
the new government, the opposition, whatever, just lied about what democracy is. And he was like, it's just another form of oppression. It's not
yeah,
true democracy.
right.
So he was like, it was kind of pointless, but at the time I thought it was doing something.
Dang. That is that's so interesting. I love being able to talk to you about this now that you are here in the U.S.
Hmm.
and you've also what you lived post like the fall or the post new government in 1989. You
Yes.
said, okay, so
I was born in
like
91, but there was still
okay,
like the
yeah,
government was still
right.
socialist. Yeah.
My wife and I went to Slovenia and Croatia last year
Yeah.
and over the summer, and we got to talk to a bunch of people there about like the fall of Yugoslavia and all
Hmm.
those things. And one person told us about how her dad was like, you know what, Yugoslavia was nice. There was always parties. I always had work. I always did this, and I always
That's,
had that. Um, and it's just
yeah,
it's so interesting to hear the
I
differences. Like
know.
what your dad's saying now, he's like, we didn't actually know what was better and kind of thing. So
That's a really good point because actually, yeah, there's a lot of nuance. If you talk to people, there's a lot of people who are staunch supporters of that regime
yeah,
because, for example, I especially older people, I
hmm
interviewed my great grandmother before she passed away. And I was
hmm
asking her, I was like, "You lived through that time. What was it like?" And she was like, honestly, it was great. There was a lot of work. There
yeah,
was low crime. These days, there's so much crime. It was almost like she saw it as like there was peace, you know?
yeah,
And then when quote unquote democracy came, crime skyrocketed. So it's like, it's, it's different vantage points and like yeah, like everybody had work. Maybe you didn't make that much money. Maybe there wasn't that much room to become
right,
whatever, a business owner or whatever, but you had enough food, you had enough work, you could take care of your family. There wasn't a lot of crime because the government would really take care of the people who were criminals.
yeah,
So, so it's like that. It's very different.
yeah, extremely. Like it's and my wife is one someone she works with is from Jamaica or maybe it was one of those
Yeah,
Caribbean countries. Oh, Haiti. It was Haiti, and they
Haiti.
used to have some type of dictatorship or whatever, and someone came in and overthrew it. And she's talked about how it was so much better when the
Yeah,
dictator was in. And it's just a crazy concept for me as an American, and maybe even you who has lived here for so long to think like, no, we've always been told that's so bad. Like, oh, those people are so
I know.
bad.
But
So,
you know when you watch like a documentary on like the New York Mafia and
mhm.
people were like, it was so much better
Yeah,
because the streets were clean, there was low crime because you
hmm
know the mafia ruled by, so it's like it's, you know what replaced the mafia, like the government, so not every it's
yeah.
just it's a very interesting
I
thinking.
It's so interesting. I didn't know that this conversation was gonna go down this
I didn't
path,
know
but
either, but
it's just
here we are.
yeah. And the history is so interesting, the way you study it and like the point of view you have when you study. Um, it's so as a journalist, would you still consider yourself a journalist or just a writer? Like,
Well, these days I say I'm a writer, but like the way I approach writing is still very much like through a journalistic lens. You know, when I was in college at the University of Georgia, the things in journalism school that were really important were like the SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. You
mm-hmm.
know, try to minimize harm, like all this stuff. And I'm just like, is that even a thing anymore? I don't know how
Yeah,
much it is emphasized these days, but I try to approach it like when I'm writing. Um, I try to be not objective, but try to like at least give people a sense of maybe here's my bias, but here's what other people believe, or like here's how the
yeah,
world actually is. I've actually written about the thing we just talked
mm,
about the democracy with my dad, and I literally called him and asked him questions to make sure that I was getting the story right. So there's parts of me that cannot get out of that journalistic mindset, but I
mhm.
consider myself a writer, which when
Yeah.
you tell people that they think you're just unemployed.
But you have your own business, and that's way better than being employed. So
Yes.
yeah. That was interesting in the podcast that you and Darren were talking about. It's like you can always, oh, I can go back to my corporate job or whatever, but you tend to not do those things, not
Yeah.
ever go back. And what's it like? working for yourself? Like, you know,
It's
and how
awesome.
was that transition?
Yeah. So of course there's things that when you leave a corporate job, the comforts of it
Yeah.
take a little bit of getting used to. So for me, I never had to negotiate contracts or deals or advertise, go out and find a sponsor and advertiser. Like those
Mhm.
things were taken care for me, and
Right.
all I had to do is sit down and write. And I think that's like the biggest luxury of working at a legacy media organization is you have one job, which is to write, and you don't have to take care, like think about even all the other stuff that goes that happens in order to fund your writing. Now, when you leave and you're like, okay, I'm an entrepreneur now, you have
Yeah.
to take care of everything. And
Everything.
if one thing slips through the cracks, like it's really hard. I think the biggest adjustment for me is that I always wanted to like write these big things and like take on these big projects,
Mhm.
but you constantly have to ask yourself like, am I doing this just for the sake of doing it? And if I don't focus on growing the newsletter,
Mhm.
then it doesn't matter how amazing the quality of this project is. Nobody
Yeah.
gets to see it because I haven't focused on the growth. So it's like a constant
Yeah.
push and pull of like growing the newsletter, writing high quality stuff, taking the time to do this versus taking the time to do that. It's like calculus.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this is just a side project for me, this little podcast, and
It's awesome.
yeah, I deal with it all the time. It's like, hey, like, what do I want to do? Do I just want to like pump out as much as I can right now and try to be consistent and lay a
Hmm.
foundation and just worry about advertising everything later? Or like, do I want to try to do a little bit of everything while I'm also working a full-time job? And, you
Yeah.
know, it's really tough to juggle.
It is tough. I would say, like, I think especially because I was in that position for a long time. I had a full-time job and I was doing something on the side until that something on the side became lucrative enough for me to leave
Yeah.
my job.
Right.
But I think when you're in that kind of position, you have to make a decision. Either I'm going to continue, because I've met a lot of people who are like, I don't want to make my side thing a job because the second you make it a job, you don't
Yeah.
love it as much and all that. But let's say you're working at your full time job and then the side thing, you're like, ooh, I really would love to grow this. I think that the way that I did it that's proved somewhat successful for me is that I just focused on making it as high quality as possible
Hmm.
while I had the job so that I would earn people's trust and then later you can be like, hey, I'm now leaving, like I would love to have your support, etc. But I
Yeah.
think the quality has to be there before you start like growing.
That makes sense. And I try to do a little bit here and there.
Yeah,
It's kind of low hanging fruit. I just record on this thing, it records for me, and then I took some time
perfect.
to make a little intro music and outro and stuff.
Yeah,
And uh overall, like it works pretty well, but it's still like doing quality work while being a husband, working a full-time job, trying to still be a friend, like a friends with my friends. And it's I know you
yeah.
know that the struggles and things like that. That's something else I wanted to ask you about is you have, a great newsletter. You're an entrepreneur yourself. Your husband's an entrepreneur. He's has his own business, and you have some kids. And like, what's the best thing you do for yourself to make sure that you juggle all of it well?
Um, I think that, like you just said, when you're trying to be all these different like roles to people, you kind of forget like what makes you happy or relaxed
Yeah.
or like not burn out. I think I have discovered that for me, it definitely is some sort of like physical exercise in
Yeah.
order to get out of my head of like all these things. So whether it's like a workout class or I go on a run or even just like a walk, if the
Mm,
day goes by and I haven't done any of those things, I'm just like, oh, I can tell I'm on my last
yeah.
leg. But I do think like for different people it'll be different things. And that's why sometimes the thing that you do on the side can be kind of your refuge from
Hmm.
all the other stuff. I remember when I talked to Amelia Boone, who's a Tough Mudder champion,
Hmm.
and but like she works as a lawyer at Apple. And I'm like, but you're so good at this. Why don't you just like quit your daytime job and just focus on the athletic stuff. And she's like, because this is literally my outlet.
Yeah.
I don't want to make this my career. I don't want
Mhm.
to worry about funding it and all this stuff.
That makes sense. And if you actually like what you do, working, I know someone that works travel too, and he loves it. Like, working
Yeah.
somewhere like that, it's great. And I like where I work too. But the idea of freedom of just like, I'm trying to do this thing. I'm calling it life unscheduled is what I'm trying to get to,
Mm,
where I'm in control of my calendar. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there, but the
yeah.
idea of starting every year or month or whatever with the blank calendar and me being able to put what I want on each day at each time, it just sounds so freeing.
Freedom.
Right.
Um, so one of the best things that I kind of kept in mind when I left Fortune was that I think a lot of people are misguided when they think that their job, like their full-time corporate job, is safe.
Yeah.
Because you would know this if you work in media, is that like every few years there's a cycle, everybody gets laid off, you lose your job,
Yeah.
and then you have to go find another one, or whatever, you're laid off for a little bit, you have to freelance. I've been through a few of those cycles now,
Hmm.
and I what I learned is that a, a corporate job, no matter how, long you've been there, it's never safe because somebody else is in control of that, and
Yeah.
100% of it's 100% of your revenue stream.
Right.
So if you lose it, you lose all of your income. Whereas if you optimize for freedom and kind of the unstructured, like you decide your schedule, then you can have multiple revenue streams. And if one dries up, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to pay your bills. So with the profile, I wanted to have subscription revenue, sponsorships, advertising. I had a syndication deal with Business Insider. Like I was getting paid from a number of different
Yeah.
places. So if one dried up, I wasn't just left high and dry.
That's so good. I think the statistic is that most millionaires, I think they have at least three
Interesting.
forms of income streams, which is super
I didn't know
interesting.
that. That is
Yeah,
very interesting.
you fact check me. I know it's something along those lines, but
It's more than one.
it's definitely more than one. I think it's even more
Yeah.
than two. Um, so, but and I know. Do you know Cody Sanchez?
Yes.
Yeah. So I attended one of her little seminars last week,
Yeah.
and she had so many great facts and things like that about building businesses versus buying businesses. And
Mm-hmm.
buying a business, you buy something that's already profitable. But starting something, I think it's like 90% of startups never make it anywhere.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
that is.
and I've been wrestling back and forth with that thought process because like buying something takes capital, and
Mm-hmm.
getting that first set of capital to get somewhere is really hard. But starting
Mm-hmm.
something's easy. And she even said this, it's like starting something's easy. Getting it profitable is the hard part.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's so much trial and error that goes into all of it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think your biggest, when you're shifting, your biggest win and loss was? Like
Professionally?
as you transition from, or even in the corporate world, and then as you're going into your entrepreneur route.
Win and loss. So, okay, I'll start with the loss, which is I think so I learned this like a while ago, and I talk about this a lot, but I think it's really important, which
Mm,
is that when I graduated from college and I didn't have a job, like literally media was in one of those cycles, nobody was hiring, and I was just like I felt so aimless and so like I didn't know who I was. It was like a
mhm.
form of extreme identity loss.
Yeah.
I think I know how people feel when they have like a midlife crisis because I was having like a quarter life
Yeah.
crisis, as
Right.
dramatic as that sounds.
Right.
It felt like that because up until then, I had always had an identity of some sort. I was always like a student. Every single year of my life, a student
Hmm.
or an intern or the editor of the college paper, like all these like external things. And then when I graduated without a job, I was like, I don't know who I am. And when people
Yeah.
ask me like, so what do you do? I'm like, I don't know what I do. I just like sit on my mom's couch. Like there is
Right.
nothing that I do.
Right.
Um, and so from there, I just understood how important it is to kind of build your own identity instead of attaching yourself and like hitching your wagon to somebody else's existing thing. So when I was at Fortune, I kind of realized that I started to do that again. I started to like think of myself as a, senior reporter at Fortune magazine or something like that. And I'm like, ugh, I'm doing it again. I don't have anything of my own. So when I started the profile, I was like, okay, I feel much better because I know that even if I get fired or laid off, I have something to fall back on that I started.
Mm-hmm.
It felt really personal. And so with that in mind, like, for example, in the beginning of the podcast, the reason I sounded so awkward when you asked me, like, who are you? Like, give us your bio. I was like, there's so many things I don't know.
Right.
So I explained it with like what I have done, but like, who am I? It's just like, it's very difficult to answer because it's like, as you may have noticed in the book,
Mm-hmm.
the entire through line in the book is that perspective and identity are very slippery.
Yeah.
So it's like who I was yesterday versus who I am today versus who I'll be in 5 years is totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And it says a lot about someone based on how they perceive themselves and how they introduce themselves.
Right.
So, if you meet somebody and they say, oh, I'm the spouse of so-and-so, it's like, my God, you wrecked your entire identity around a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
around another person. It's not
Mm-hmm.
even you. So it's always fascinating to see and hear how people answer that question. Then, so the biggest loss I would say was like losing my identity and then realizing that that was something you could lose. And then the biggest win, I think, has been that I've just like learned a lot. It's been 4 years now that I left Fortune and I've been doing this full time. Not only have I learned a lot like professionally, but I've also learned a lot personally because the way it worked out, I always thought like I would have kids, but like I would have a full-time job for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with my mom where my parents were 20 and 24 when I was born,
Mm-hmm.
and they were still like getting their master's degree. So I was like, what do you like most regret about that time? And my mom was like, that we weren't with you in those like early years.
Yeah.
So for me, like I always kind of wanted to spend time with my kids, but also work. And in this way, the biggest win was that I got to do both.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like I have a different opinion than the cultural norm when it comes to mothers, and I'm a man, so it is what it is. But like my dad,
you
passed
can
away.
have an opinion.
Yeah, I have an opinion. My dad passed away when I was 10, and I have two younger
Wow.
brothers. And my mom chose not to like work a crazy job to ensure that we still had her, so we didn't lose both of our parents at the same time. And it was so important for me as a person to have her there with me, and my brothers. And so my wife now, she's a pediatric nurse. She loves children.
Oh, cool.
But like the whole thing is like, I want her to, the same thing that you're doing. If she doesn't want to have to work for someone else so that she can raise our kids once they enter the world, I think that's so important. I'm not saying that she shouldn't work. If she wants to, she can, she should,
Yeah.
But if she wants to take that route of being there for our kids, I think that's so important.
It's beyond important, and it's like, and of course it's a luxury, right, to be able to choose whether you want to. But like you said, your mom made it work. Like even if you don't have the luxury of having both parents and one, it's like I always say like it's like a shifting of priorities. Like if your priorities are your kids, you will figure out a way to somehow work and be there for them, or not work a regular job and be there for them. So it's like, I think definitely for me, my early 20s were like work. I'm so excited to whatever. And then like, I honestly don't care that much anymore because right now I really, really care about these two humans. So it's like your time and attention goes where like your priorities are.
Absolutely. And it's so cool because you're driven and you have this business, and you're still making time to be with your kids, and you're putting them as a priority. And it's good to hear. There's a lot of like really successful people that don't do that.
Yeah.
Successful. I know that you say that a lot. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what actually is success. But I have something on the podcast with Darren that you mentioned about like, oh, I want to be Elon or I want to be Jeff Bezos, and it's like you got to realize that like those people to get to where they are, they had to sacrifice something, and you know, do you really want to do that?
Yeah.
I think that was huge.
Yeah, everyone kind of falls in the trap of like idolizing these figures. I think for me, for a while, although I never idolized them, I did look to them as
Hmm.
like, wow, these are two extremely hyper ambitious people who are able to make a marriage work. They've raised their kids right. And that
Hmm.
was Bill and Melinda Gates.
Hmm.
So naturally, when Bill and Melinda said they were getting divorced, everyone was like, oh, what?
Hmm.
They were together talking about the, ambition, all this stuff. And you're like, uh-oh, because clearly no one knows what they've had to sacrifice or what really happened in their marriage. Of course, they're not going to air out in
Right.
public. So it's like I never get too attached to things that, or these figures that are just so manicured and media trained where you don't know what's going on. So
Yeah.
like I always say like make sure you're learning, not idolizing. There's definitely things you can learn from them
Hmm.
and their relationship. Actually, like I wrote a profile dossier, which is a deep dive on Melinda Gates, and she said something interesting like make sure that you are both always looking in the same direction. Even if you have different goals or ambitions, make sure that you're like side by side looking in the same direction of where you want to go, because when that starts to diverge, you're not growing in similar ways. And I don't know if that's what happened to them. I have no clue, but there are things that you can learn that you can apply to your own life without idolizing them like one for one model.
Yeah, that's so good. I've been thinking a lot about like people that I look up to or inspire me and things like that recently, and I have a really tough time thinking like of someone in all honesty
Yeah.
because I look at them and I'm just like, one, I don't want to be anybody else. I want to be me. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
Steven and I'm Phen. Like I want to
Yeah.
be me. There are people that I can learn from, like you just said, and I'm a software engineer. I look at like so
So
many
cool.
great things that people have done. It's like, oh, that's awesome. I have this textbook on my the mastering Bitcoin. Like, how can I like how can I just be better? Those people inspire me, but like I still want to be me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so
And it's
mm,
yeah, and it's like the um it, you can like emulate actions. I think I heard this on like the My First Million podcast where
mm,
they said you want to be David Goggins 10% of the time, but you don't want to be David Goggins 100% of the time. You don't want to like leave dinner with your wife and be like, I gotta go run 100-mile race right now,
yeah,
because that's what he does.
yeah,
But it's like you can take a small nugget of wisdom from him
hmm,
and institute it in your day versus being like, I'm gonna copy everything he does and I'm gonna become this person. It's just impossible.
yeah. It's so true. And I mean, David Goggins is insane. I don't even know if I want to be 1% of him,
I
but
know 1%. That's
yeah,
pushing it.
he's crazy. I was talking to my cousin about. I was like, man, if I had a quarter of the discipline that guy has, like, I wonder where I would be in life.
And we all
Oh,
do.
right. Oh, I know we're coming up close to time. You have a time constraint, and I want to be respectful of that. So,
Thank you.
I'm gonna do like some lightning questions for you. Like,
Perfect.
all right, what type of music do you like to listen to?
Oh my God. You know what? All right. So this is, I mean, going to turn a lot of people off, but I grew up in Atlanta
uh,
and I started listening to Taylor Swift when she was still country.
hmm.
So I like that music, although, it wouldn't kill her to like do another more pop album, in my
Hmm.
opinion. But I like the definitely, Britney Spears back in I like
Oh,
that stuff.
nice,
I'm not
nice.
I'm not a good cultured, and I will say, do you know uh oh my God, the Ava brothers?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like that too.
Nice. Wow, that's a wide range.
Very
Okay.
wide range.
You live in New York. You love New York. Why do you like this city so much?
Um I think that I just it's when you walk outside there's like ambition in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody you meet, you can have like a very, very interesting conversation. And I love that there's not a one type of person. You can go outside today, go get coffee, and meet 7 different completely strange people in terms of like beliefs, ideologies, the ways they see the world. And I love that.
Oh, that's cool. I'm so not a city person, so I'm always curious what people like. We don't live in Atlanta. I'd never go into Atlanta. It's just like too much for me.
Exactly.
So,
of course.
all right. Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a much younger sister.
Very cool. And out of all the people you've researched or written about, who do you think's the most interesting and why?
I would say Sarah Blakely,
Okay.
the founder of Spanx. She's from Atlanta.
Yep.
She's actually the person in a way that inspired the profile because I was 20 something years old. I was working at this awful startup that I didn't want to be working at. And I was like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And then I kind of read about her in a random book. So I went down a rabbit hole and I read her life story. And it was like, she said that she was selling fax machines. She was trying to get all these jobs that weren't right for her. And she told herself, I'm living in the wrong movie. Like, this is not my movie.
Right.
So she kind of like crafted her life to be what she wanted it to be. And she's just like an awesome person in the way that she's a natural storyteller. So a lot of the things that you think you know, when you hear her say it, you're like, I've never thought about it like that, but now it makes more sense.
Oh man, that's cool. Fun fact for you, funny story. My wife was down at some bachelorette trip in Florida, some like seaside or Destin or something like that, and some guy started like hitting on her in a bar, and
oh god,
she gave him a fake name and said that she was Sarah Blakely. And like it was.
So he probably thinks that he has met Sarah Blakely.
Right. It was so funny. She said they walked out of the bar, and then one of the girls she was with was like, "Did you just tell him that you're the founder of Spanx?" And so very funny.
Oh, that's hilarious. He heard Sarah Blakely later on. He was like, "Wait a second."
Yeah, right. I was like, they don't look that similar. I don't know, but yeah, it's a funny story. That's so cool. Represent Atlanta. That's great. So, all right. Well, thank you for your time. We're coming up on your time restraint. So, awesome. I appreciate it so much.
We should do a part 2 another time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if this is weird, but if you're ever back in Atlanta, you always want to get dinner or something, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll do a double date.
That'd be fun. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to follow on whatever platform you're listening on and send it to a friend. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. They really help boost my exposure. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed and liking every video. It really helps the algorithm. Links to all my and my guest socials, along with music credits, are in the show notes. Thanks so much. Love y'all. Bye.